Now, once we have a conditional acceptance with deposit check, the next step is to waive conditions. Most common conditions when purchasing real estate in the city are that people have a 5-day conditional period to obtain a mortgage and a 5-day conditional period to have a home inspection performed. And then what the realtors will work together to do is to have those conditions waived. And this is one of those scenarios where it's the buyer's right and ability to back out if they're not satisfied. So a seller is tied to the agreement. A seller now has to sit and wait. And a buyer performs their due diligence, and they need to satisfy themselves with the home inspection as to whether or not the house meets their requirements. And in the case of a condominium, it's not a home inspection, you obtain a status certificate. And it talks about the reserves and it talks about the state of the building, the condition of the building. Then the buyer also needs to go and get a mortgage. A buyer, if they don't like the condition of a house, they can come back and renegotiate and revise the price. Or they may back out. When a buyer, if they propose to revise the price, now the seller can decide if they agree or not. The buyer also, suppose they go and get a mortgage and it's at a rate or some sort of mortgage term that they're not happy with. The buyer can back out based on that. So it's not just about obtaining a mortgage, but it's obtaining a mortgage satisfactory to the buyer at the buyer's absolute and sole discretion. So it's up to their mood. If they say, hey, I was hoping to get a mortgage with 1%, but I only got 2.5%, they can back out for that reason. It's unreasonable, but technically they can. So when we are in the sole conditional period, the buyer can back out, but the seller is held liable and contractually bound to the agreement. And the reason this exists is because in real estate, there is no 10-day buyer's remorse period. If you go and look at the Consumer Protection Agency, if you go buy a piece of furniture or electronics and you come home and within 10 days you feel buyer's remorse and you regret making that purchase, you're allowed to return it. And the seller is supposed to return it for you in full. With real estate, there is no buyer's remorse period, and that's why there are this 5-day or 7-day conditional period where a buyer can perform extra due diligence to satisfy themselves that they want to purchase the property. Because once the buyer waives the conditions, that's a firm sale and they can't back out. And it's one of those things, if the buyer does nothing and the 5 days or 7 days, whatever it may be, expires, then by default the contract becomes void. So it's one of those things, if the buyer is negligent and disappears, it can just expire and the 5 days pass and the contract is null and void.